My phone buzzed during my lunch break, and I almost didn't check it. Work had been crazy that Tuesday, and I was finally getting 5 minutes to breathe. But something made me glance at the screen, and I'm so grateful I did. Mom, can you pick me up early today? Don't tell Grandma you're coming. Please just trust me on this. My heart immediately started racing. My 12-year-old son Jake was staying at my mother-in-law's house for the week while I worked extra shifts to cover our mortgage payment. He'd been excited about spending time with Grandma Susan, and she'd been thrilled to have him. This text felt completely wrong. I stared at those words, reading them 3 times. Jake never asked me not to tell anyone anything. He was usually an open book, chattering away about every detail of his day. And the way he wrote it, so serious, so urgent, sent every maternal alarm bell in my body screaming. I grabbed my keys without even finishing my sandwich. Family emergency, I told my supervisor, already heading for the door. The 20-minute drive to Susan's house felt like an eternity. My mind raced through possibilities. Was Jake hurt? Had something happened with Susan? Had someone else been there? I pulled into her driveway and texted Jake, "I'm here." Within seconds, the front door flew open. My son came running toward my car, clutching a crumpled piece of paper against his chest. His face was flushed, and I could see he'd been crying. He yanked open the passenger door and practically threw himself into the seat. "Drive, Mom, just drive. Don't go to the door. Don't talk to her." "Jake, what's going on? You're scaring me." He held up that wrinkled paper with shaking hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma's been lying to us, Mom, about everything. About Dad, about why he left, about the money." His voice cracked. "She's been lying this whole time, and I found proof." I stared at my son, then at that piece of paper that seemed to hold secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But looking at Jake's tear-stained face, I knew there was no turning back. Whatever was on that paper was about to change everything. I pulled over into a parking lot 2 blocks away, my hands shaking as I reached for the paper. "Show me, baby. What did you find?" Jake smoothed out the crumpled document, and my world tilted sideways. It was an email thread between my mother-in-law, Susan, and Jake's teacher, Mrs. Peterson. The subject line read, "Jake's behavioral issues confidential, do not contact mother." "Mom, look at the date," Jake whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. "This is from 3 weeks ago." I read the first email from Mrs. Peterson. "Jake has been disruptive in class, refusing to complete assignments, and showing signs of emotional distress. I need to schedule a parent conference immediately." But it was Susan's response that made my blood run cold. "I am Jake's primary caregiver during the day. His mother is dealing with severe anxiety and depression. Any communication about Jake's issues should come directly to me. I have medical power of attorney and will handle this situation. Please do not contact her as it will only worsen her mental state." Jake, I couldn't even find words. I don't have anxiety or depression, and she definitely doesn't have any power of attorney over you. "There's more, Mom." Jake's voice was barely audible. She made me write lines in the basement when Mrs. Peterson told her I was acting out. 500 times. "I will not embarrass my family." And she said if I told you, you'd get so sick you'd have to go to the hospital like Daddy did. The mention of his father hit me like a punch to the gut. Jake's dad had struggled with mental health issues before he left us 2 years ago, and Susan knew exactly how to weaponize that trauma. "She's been reading my journal too, Mom, the one you gave me to write my feelings in. She said she had to make sure I wasn't saying bad things about the family." Jake's tears started flowing again. "I wrote about missing you during your long work shifts, and she punished me for being ungrateful." I pulled my son into the tightest hug of his life, my own tears mixing with his. the woman I'd trusted with my child, who I'd been grateful to, for providing free childcare, had been systematically abusing him while painting me as an unfit mother to his school. Jake, you are so brave for telling me this. We're going to fix this, I promise. As I held my son in that parking lot, the pieces of a horrifying puzzle started falling into place. This wasn't the first time Susan had overstepped boundaries, but I'd always dismissed her behavior as just being helpful or old-fashioned parenting. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags earlier. When Jake's father left us 2 years ago after his mental health crisis, Susan immediately swooped in with offers of help. "You can't handle this alone, dear," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Let me take care of Jake while you work. It's what family does." At the time, I was drowning, working double shifts as a nurse to keep our house, dealing with my ex-husband's abandonment, and trying to be strong for Jake. Susan's offer of free childcare seemed like a lifeline. I was so grateful, so relieved to have help, that I ignored the subtle ways she began undermining me. "Jake doesn't need therapy," she'd say when I mentioned getting him counseling after his father left. "He just needs structure and discipline. You're too soft on him." When I'd find Jake withdrawn and anxious after spending weekends with her, she'd wave it off. "Boys his age get moody. Don't coddle him." She'd started making decisions without consulting me. New haircuts, different clothes, even changing his bedtime routine when he stayed over. "I raised 4 children successfully," she'd remind me whenever I questioned her methods. "Your generation overthinks everything." But the most insidious part was how she'd positioned herself as the stable influence in Jake's life while subtly suggesting I was falling apart. She'd make comments in front of Jake like, "Good thing Grandma's here to take care of you while Mommy's working so much." Or, "We can't tell Mommy about this little accident. She has enough to worry about." I'd noticed Jake becoming more secretive over the past few months. He'd stopped sharing details about his time at Grandma's house, would clam up when I asked about his day, and seemed increasingly anxious about normal childhood things. When I asked him about it, he'd just shrug and say, "Grandma says I shouldn't bother you with little stuff." The financial dependency made everything worse. As a single mom working in a profession that barely paid enough to cover our mortgage, I couldn't afford quality after-school care. Susan's free babysitting wasn't just helpful, it was essential to our survival, and she knew it. "You know I only want what's best for Jake," she'd say whenever I tried to assert my parental authority. "But if you think you can do better on your own..." The threat was always implied but never directly stated. Until today, I'd felt trapped between gratitude and growing unease, never imagining she'd go this far. Now, reading those emails where she'd fabricated lies about my mental health and positioned herself as Jake's primary caregiver, I realized this had been a calculated campaign to undermine my role as his mother. "Jake, I need you to tell me everything," I said, wiping my eyes and trying to steady my voice. "Every single thing Grandma did that felt wrong, no matter how small it seems." What came out of my son's mouth over the next hour made me physically sick. The basement punishments weren't just writing lines. They were psychological torture sessions that lasted hours. Jake described being forced to sit in a cold, dimly lit basement while writing the same phrase hundreds of times. "I will not disappoint my family. I will not be weak like my father. I will obey without question." "She'd set a timer, Mom," Jake whispered. If I cried or asked for water, she'd add another 100 lines and restart the timer. She said tears were manipulation, just like Dad used to do to you. But the worst revelation came when Jake pulled out his phone and showed me photos he'd secretly taken. Pictures of worksheets with my forged signature, approving behavioral modifications I'd never agreed to. Pictures of a fake doctor's note claiming I was mentally unstable and requiring supervised visitation with my child. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Jake, when did she make these? Last week. She has this whole folder in her desk with papers about you. She showed them to me and said this is why I couldn't tell you things. Because you're too sick to handle the truth. And if anyone found out, they'd take me away from you forever. The manipulation was breathtakingly cruel. She'd been using my son's love for me as a weapon against both of us, terrifying him into silence while systematically building a case to paint me as an unfit mother. Jake then showed me the email chain. He'd screenshotted from Susan's computer. Mrs. Peterson had repeatedly tried to contact me directly, expressing concern about Jake's declining grades and behavioral changes. But Susan had intercepted every attempt, responding with increasingly elaborate lies about my mental state. One email particularly stood out. Jake's mother had another episode last week and had to be sedated. She's currently under psychiatric evaluation. I have temporary guardianship documents and will be handling all school matters indefinitely. Please mark your records that all communication should go through me. Jake, this is completely fabricated. I've never had any episode, never been sedated, never been under psychiatric evaluation, and she definitely doesn't have guardianship documents. I know, Mom. That's why I took pictures of everything. She keeps it all in a file labeled emergency custody evidence. There are fake medical reports, made-up diary entries she wrote pretending to be you, and even a fake police report about you having a mental breakdown at work. I stared at the evidence in horror. This wasn't just lying or overstepping boundaries. This was systematic fraud designed to steal my child. The fake medical documents looked incredibly professional, complete with forged doctor signatures and official letterheads. She told me she was protecting me from your instability, Jake continued, tears streaming down his face. She said you were getting worse just like Dad did, and if I was a good boy and let her handle everything, maybe you wouldn't have to go away like he did. The cruelty of using Jake's trauma about his father's departure as leverage made my stomach turn. She'd weaponized my son's greatest fear, losing another parent, to ensure his compliance and silence. My phone rang while Jake and I were still processing the evidence. Susan's name flashed on the screen, and my blood turned to ice. I looked at Jake, who immediately went pale. "Answer it, Mom," he whispered. "But put it on speaker. You need to hear how she really talks." I accepted the call with trembling fingers. "Hello, Susan. Where is Jake?" Her voice was sharp, demanding. No pleasantries, no concern, just immediate interrogation. He was supposed to be here for dinner preparation. You know how I feel about disrupted schedules. "Jake is with me. We need to talk about what's been happening at school." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted to that saccharine sweetness I now recognized as manipulation. "Oh, honey, I was hoping we wouldn't have to have this conversation. Yet, I've been protecting you from some difficult news about Jake's behavior. The school has been very concerned about both of you. Susan, I've seen the emails. I know you've been lying to his teacher about me having mental health problems." Another pause. When she responded, the mask completely dropped. "You went through my private communications? How dare you violate my privacy like that? This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior I've been documenting." "Documenting?" The word hit me like a slap. "You've been documenting me?" "Someone has to be the responsible adult here," she snapped. "You work constantly, you're emotionally unstable just like your ex-husband, and that poor child is suffering because of it. I've been trying to handle this situation quietly, but since you want to make it difficult..." Jake grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. I could see in his face that he'd heard this tone before. "Susan, you forged medical documents. You lied to the school. You've been psychologically abusing my son." She actually laughed, a cold, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "Abuse? I've been providing structure and discipline that you're clearly incapable of. Jake needs a firm hand, not your permissive parenting that's turning him into a weak, emotional mess like his father. Don't you dare listen carefully, she interrupted, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You're going to bring Jake back here right now, and we're going to pretend this conversation never happened. You're going to continue your arrangement with me because, frankly, you need me more than I need you. Like hell I am. Really? Because I have documentation of your mental instability dating back months. I have witness statements about your erratic behavior. I have medical opinions about your fitness as a mother. Push me on this and I'll call Child Protective Services tonight. Jake made a small, terrified sound beside me. This was exactly what she'd been threatening him with. The fear that had kept him silent for weeks. And another thing, Susan continued, clearly enjoying her power play. I've already spoken to your supervisor at the hospital, shared some concerns about your emotional state affecting your patient care. Wouldn't want that to escalate, would we? My job. She was threatening my job, the only thing keeping us afloat financially. You have until tomorrow morning to bring Jake back and resume our normal arrangement. If you don't, I'll be making some very important phone calls. And trust me, dear, no one is going to believe the word of an unstable single mother over a respected community member with documentation. The line went dead. Jake and I sat in stunned silence, both of us shaking. Mom, she's going to call CPS, isn't she? Jake's voice was small and scared. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a child who'd been terrorized into silence for weeks. In that moment, my fear transformed into something much more powerful. Absolute determination to protect my child. Not if I call them first, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Jake, we're not running from this anymore. We're going to fight back with the truth. My first call was to Jake's school. Mrs. Peterson answered on the second ring, and I could hear the relief in her voice when I identified myself. Mrs. Anderson, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I was so concerned when your mother-in-law said you were unwell. Mrs. Peterson, I need to meet with you and the principal immediately. Everything Susan told you was a lie. I've never been mentally unwell. She doesn't have any guardianship rights, and she's been abusing my son. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Oh my God, Mrs. Peterson whispered. Can you come in right now? I'm calling. Principal Martinez immediately. Within an hour, Jake and I were sitting in the principal's office with Mrs. Peterson, showing them the evidence Jake had collected. Principal Martinez examined the forged signatures and fake medical documents with growing horror. Mrs. Anderson, this is criminal fraud, he said, his voice grim. These documents are sophisticated forgeries. Someone put significant effort into creating a false narrative about your mental health. Mrs. Peterson was visibly shaken. I feel terrible. I questioned some of her claims, but she seemed so concerned and knowledgeable about your family situation. She even brought what appeared to be medical documentation. It's not your fault, I assured her. She manipulated all of us, Principal. Martinez picked up his phone. I'm calling our school district's crisis intervention specialist. This situation involves child abuse, fraud, and potentially more serious crimes. We need law enforcement involved. Within 30 minutes, Detective Sarah Chen arrived, a specialist in family crisis situations. She listened to Jake's testimony with professional compassion, taking detailed notes as he described the basement punishments, the psychological manipulation, and the threats about me being too sick to be his mother. Jake, you were very brave to document this, Detective Chen said, examining the photos on his phone. This evidence is crucial. She turned to me with a serious expression. Mrs. Anderson, what you're showing me constitutes several felonies. The forged medical documents alone are criminal fraud. The psychological abuse of your son constitutes child endangerment, and the systematic campaign to undermine your parental rights could be considered kidnapping conspiracy. What happens? Now? I asked. Now we build an official case. I'll coordinate with Child Protective Services, but as the investigating officer, I want to be very clear. You are not the subject of this investigation. Your mother-in-law is. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Finally, someone with authority was taking us seriously, validating what had happened and promising justice. Detective Chen moved fast. Within 48 hours, Susan was arrested at her home on charges of criminal fraud, forgery, child endangerment, and conspiracy to interfere with parental custody. The look of shock on her face when the handcuffs clicked shut was something I'll never forget. The evidence Jake had collected proved to be the key to everything. The fake medical documents were traced to a printing service where Susan had paid cash for official-looking letterheads. Security cameras showed her at multiple locations gathering supplies for her fraud scheme. But the most damning evidence came from Susan's own computer. Detective Chen's digital forensics team found a folder titled Custody Case Preparation, containing dozens of fabricated documents, fake diary entries she'd written pretending to be me, and a detailed timeline of her plan to gradually assume legal custody of Jake. She'd been planning this for months, Detective Chen explained during one of our follow-up meetings. There were email drafts to Child Protective Services claiming you were neglecting Jake, and she'd been researching emergency custody procedures. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This was a calculated campaign. The court proceedings were swift. Susan's lawyer initially tried to claim she was protecting Jake from an unstable mother, but the forensic evidence destroyed that narrative. The fake medical documents alone carried a sentence of up to 3 years in prison. In the end, Susan received a suspended 2-year jail sentence with strict conditions: 5 years of supervised probation, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and a permanent no-contact order, preventing her from seeing or contacting Jake and me. Any violation would result in immediate imprisonment, but the legal consequences were just the beginning. The community backlash was swift and brutal. Susan had been a respected member of our church, volunteering with the children's ministry and organizing community events. When news of her crime spread, the reaction was immediate. She was removed from all volunteer positions at church. The community center where she taught senior fitness classes terminated her contract. Even her own family started distancing themselves from her. The most satisfying moment came when my brother-in-law Mark, Susan's golden child who had always defended her controlling behavior, called me to apologize. "I never believed she could do something like this," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "All those times you tried to tell us she was overstepping, and we just said you were being sensitive. We're so sorry, and we want you to know that Jake will always be welcomed and protected in our family." Jake's father even reached out, the first time we'd heard from him in over a year. When he learned what his mother had done to his son, he broke down completely. "She told me you were keeping Jake from me because of my mental health issues," he sobbed over the phone. "She said you thought I was too unstable to see him. I believed her because it seemed like something you might do to protect him." Even from a distance, Susan had been manipulating everyone, using our family's trauma and good intentions against us. It's been 6 months since Susan was arrested, and the transformation in both Jake and me has been remarkable. Without the constant stress and manipulation, Jake has returned to being the happy, talkative kid I remembered. His grades have improved dramatically, and he's even joined the school's drama club, something Susan had forbidden because it was too emotional and would make him soft. We found an amazing after-school program through the community center. It costs more than I'd like, but my supervisor at the hospital, the same one Susan had tried to poison against me, actually helped me apply for a scholarship program for single parents. Turns out several of my colleagues had noticed Susan's inappropriate calls to my workplace and had been documenting them in case I needed support. Jake and I have also started family therapy. It's been incredibly healing to have a safe space to process what happened and rebuild our communication. Jake told me recently, "Mom, I'm not scared to tell you things anymore. I know you'll believe me and protect me." That sentence alone made every difficult moment worth it. The no contact order remains in place, and we've heard through family that Susan still maintains she was trying to help, and that we're too sensitive to understand her methods. Some people never change, but the important thing is that she can never hurt Jake again. I've started sharing our story with other parents in similar situations. You'd be amazed how many families have controlling grandparents or relatives who use financial dependency and emotional manipulation to overstep boundaries. Knowledge is power, and I want other mothers to recognize these red flags before the situation escalates. Looking back, I realize this experience taught me the most important lesson of motherhood. Sometimes protecting your child means standing up to people you love, even when it's terrifying. Sometimes it means choosing your child's well-being over financial convenience or family peace. The mama bear instinct isn't just about protecting your kids from strangers. Sometimes it's about protecting them from family members who hide their toxic behavior behind good intentions. So I want to ask you, have you ever dealt with family members who undermined your parenting or used manipulation to control your relationship with your children? Did you have to make difficult choices to protect your kids from toxic family dynamics? Share your stories in the comments. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in these impossible situations. Remember, trust your instincts, believe your children, and never let anyone, not even family, convince you that their version of love is worth your child's well-being.